Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's a pleasure to take a short call in this committee stage of the Passports Amendment Bill number 2. And in so doing, I want to acknowledge both the Minister, the Honourable Peter Dunn, for bringing this bill to the floor of the House, and also to distinguished colleagues, the Honourable Phil Goff, with whom I recall having a discussion about whether we would support the 10-year extension a year or two ago, and the Honourable Trevor Mallard, who, as our Internal Affairs spokesperson, has championed the cause of the 10-year passport. With that, Sir, may I turn our attention to the substance of the bill. This is the Part 1 debate, Part 1 of the bill. Go through the whole thing. Well, it's almost, my point to my learned colleague was actually virtually the same point, which is that 95% of the bill is contained in Part 1, so we'd expect this part debate to be tantamount to the whole thing and to be relatively broad-ranging. So let us firstly go to the principles which underlie this extension. It is essentially that the technology and the security thereof has advanced to the point where there is no greater risk to the public, the travelling public, or to the Crown from issuing a 10-year passport as opposed to a 5-year passport. Therefore, it is logically in the interests of the public to have the convenience of not having to renew the passport every 5 years when a 10-year passport is possible. And I don't think there'd be too many people in the listening public who would disagree with that principle being applied, and that's why the House is unanimous or near unanimous in support of this bill. However, the complexity arises at the level of detail, not so much the drafting detail as I think, while there are a few technical sub-clauses here, the intent of the bill is clear and it's been worked through the Select Committee process. But the main debate turned on the issue of costing. And the argument, sir, is at several levels. The costing provisions, of course, are within this. The government's holding the cost lower, and we support it, lower than the original Treasury modelling would have predicted. I turn to the regulatory impact statement, page 12, part 2, cost implications. Using current modelling in paragraph 65, passports would cost either $199 for a 5-year passport or $274 for a 10-year passport. Treasury further advised that the fiscal cost of holding the price down to $200 for a 10-year passport might be in the order of $200 million over time, which is a big number, and I'll come back to that issue in a second. But let's just take a moment to reflect upon the difference between the $199 and the $274. The marginal cost of production of a 10-year passport, one would assume to be small or negligible relative to the cost of production of a 5-year passport. They are essentially the same type of document with the same type of technology embedded. And if government can explain the difference, I see the Minister of Immigration shaking his head. We look forward to him taking a call, or perhaps Minister Dunn may take a call and explain the difference, because what I suspect has gone on is that officials have taken the fixed cost component of running the Department of Internal Affairs overheads and defrayed that over a smaller number of transactions because members of the public are having to take out fewer passports because they last longer.
Good point.
So it is a fixed cost spread, a management accounting fiction, if you like, which has led to this result. And that's why I actually support the Cabinet's decision to keep this cost down. Sir, one of the roles that's my privilege to play in this place is currently the chair of the Regulations Review Committee, and we have a couple of matters live before the committee where we are addressing ourselves, and in one case with the help, which is public knowledge, of the Auditor General's Office, looking at the question of whether departmental overheads have been correctly charged in respect of fees for service, or whether by loading fixed overhead departmental costs into them, they are in fact a disguised tax. And so what I would call on the Minister to do now, for the purposes of clarity, and this is not because we disagree, we actually agree with the government's stand here to keep the costs down, is for the Minister to explain exactly why the same type of, Mr. Chairman.
Honourable David Cunliffe.
Explain exactly why an identical or almost identical passport document which has a 10-year life costs $74 more on this calculation than the same document with a 5-year life. Is it because it's got 5 more pages or 7 more pages and the pages cost $10 each? Or is it because it's got a stronger binding that's designed to last in your bag for another 5 years? Tougher glue? Is there a better quality insignia? Or some flash hidden electronic innovation embedded deep within the fibres of this high-tech passport that has bumped the cost up to this extent? Or, sir, is this another example of officials building in departmental overheads to the point where business as usual in the department carries on untrammelled even though there is lower demand for the product? And if that is the case, then I would commend the Cabinet, I don't say this very often, commend the Cabinet for making a decision to intervene and keep the cost down, because that is what the Labour Party supports. New Zealanders being able to travel with the convenience and security of a 10-year passport at a reasonable cost, and we are not convinced by the cost methodology that's contained in the regulatory impact statement. And sir, if I might come to the broader point, embedded as it is in part 1 of this bill, and recognising that this is a committee stage, and to reflect upon the Treasury's estimate, which I assume is an estimate over multiple years, of a $200 million additional cost to keep the price down to $200 a passport, against an earlier estimate of $400. Now, those are obviously round numbers, but it does bring us back to the issue of whether this government is being prudent with the taxpayers' money. And there are some examples which are not unrelated that have caused New Zealanders to question that. The first is the $26 million on the flag referendum.
That's got nothing to do with this bill.
Well, the flag is embedded in the passport,
no.
Mr. Chairman. Oh, right. Yep. Okay. That's why I said not unrelated, Mr. Chairman. Yep. And so I won't mention the $140,000 TV screen. And I won't mention the $11 million for the New York apartment.
Order. The member is testing my patience on this. Order. I made it very clear that, as the previous presiding officer did, that we'd come and just focus on the bill. So just focus on that. The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will take your guidance on that matter. Sir, if we look at the departmental disclosure statement, it's gone through the normal round of questionnaire, yes, no's. It's provided the further information that we would expect. It's embedded in the regulatory impact statement, and we've been discussing part 2 of that, pages 12 onwards. And we've addressed ourselves to the cost, and I see on page 14 of that document the costings that we've referred to for the required Crown revenue requirements for reducing fees for 10-year passports are set out. $13 million for June 2017, rising to $32 million for June 23, $43 million 24, $46 million 25, $41 million in 2026. Sir, that is a substantial amount of revenue, but at the end of the day, sir, it comes back to my earlier point, it is only accurate if the departmental overhead costing, the management accounting of this exercise is accurate. If those estimates are overblown, then this revenue position is overblown, and far be it from us to come to the government's aid, but putting these provisions aside for future cash flow will of course not help them reach their ascribed target of reaching surplus, because they'll be carrying a $20 to $40 million a year additional deficit from this revenue projection, which may not be fully necessary, sir, depending on the validity of the overhead allocation methodology in that cost accounting. And I would ask the Minister to take a call and describe to the House the degree to which Cabinet turned its mind to that issue in deciding to keep the fees down. Was it that they were prepared to inject that $200 million, or did they not actually believe the department's estimates? Because I do think these things can be a little, shall we say, elastic. So may I conclude by just summing up where I began. Labor strongly supports this change to a 10-year passport. I commend the Minister, also commend my colleagues Phil Goff and Trevor Mallard for bringing this to the House.
Mr. Chairman.